I think that's an important lesson for a lot of listeners. There's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are sitting on the sidelines thinking, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't, but I'm taking the more conservative approach. Well, your conservative approach is probably going to be one of the riskiest things you do at the end of the day, unless you really want to step back at retirement.
Hi, I'm Wyatt. And I'm Grace. And you're listening to our dad and your host of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Sean Moore, and we are back with our Friday episodes where we interview short-term rental investors willing to share the ups, the downs, and the in-betweens of investing into short-term rentals. Today, we've got Mr. Chad McLaughlin coming and joining us. And so, Chad, thanks for joining us, my friend. Appreciate you willing to share the story of the journey into short-term rental investing.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, we had a chance to catch up a little bit at our Dallas meetup here a few months back, and I know that you've had quite the journey that we're going to get into. But I always like to start with the background. You know, what pays the bills? Any real estate investing in the past? What led you into short-term rental investing initially? And then we'll kind of go from there and talk about the journey.
All right. So originally from Nebraska, moved to Texas a few years ago. I'm in the IT world and have been for coming up on 30 years now. And I guess probably around 2000 or so, got the Robert Kiyosaki stuff, started reading some of that. I'm like, well, that all makes sense. And I actually started poking around back at that time and got close to buying a multifamily property at that point. But I just got cold feet. I just did not have the confidence to go forward and said, nah, not now. So put that on the back burner but it's always in the back of my mind. And fast forward several years, a couple of decades, right? I catch you on Instagram. I'm like, well, this makes total sense. And these guys know what they're doing, it sounds like. So that's kind of what pushed me over the edge, and having the conversation with the team and stuff to get us in. But yeah, IT pays the bills for now, and definitely looking forward to moving forward with the short-term.
Yeah, starting to replace some of that active income with some passive, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's interesting. Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, probably got more people at least believing that this was possible for them, that investing in these things were possible, that you didn't have to just stay in the rat race. I mean, I don't know, it's crazy how many people that book really started kind of opening somebody's eyes to different possibilities, which is, I'm so grateful for the book myself. And, it was, I was in the game a little bit before he wrote that book, but just a game changer of just starting to change the mindset of, hey, maybe I can start to do this. And back then you started moving forward, got close, and then we kind of got cold feet. And it's interesting what holds us back at times. And sometimes we get the knowledge and the books and everything else, but it is sometimes nice to have somebody to run down that road with you a little bit. And, and it sounds like when you found us and discovered what we could do in our community at Vodyssey and everything else, it gives you a little more confidence, right? There's a little bit more confidence on the back end if you really have somebody walking down the road together instead of just theoretically reading a book or hearing a concept and trying to actually execute on it when you've never executed before. That's what, and so it's interesting how that gets people over the edge, not just us, but other coaches and mentors that have that experience is really helpful, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other half of the equation is that, the wife and I, we're saving, got our 401ks and all that jazz, which is good. That's what we knew. And, talking with financial advisors and things and looking forward to trying to potentially retire at some point, we're like, well, we'll probably be in an okay place at that point in our lives, but it's not going to keep up with inflation. We know that, that amount that we get is fixed and it's going to continue to have less and less buying power. Yeah. So we knew we needed to do something to generate some revenue. And that was the other half of the equation, that once we had that conversation, then you popped into our lives on Instagram. It's like, this is, we got to do something. We got to make a move. So
yeah, it's interesting. So, you're relatively young and, in the grand scheme of things of retirement age and everything else, but I can't tell you how many people, don't meet with financial advisors and they just assume contributing their 401k and maxing that out and everything else, that they're going to be okay at the end of the day. And I can't tell you how many people we talk to that say, man, I just realized that we might be okay, but man, with inflation and everything else, my living standards are probably going to drop at retirement, and none of us want that, right? And so we have to look at our alternatives. And I think now more than ever, especially with inflation, especially with what's going on, we have got to be able to do something different than the traditional. I'm going to just contribute to my 401k till I'm 65, and then I hope I'm okay. And most people have never even run the scenario or the numbers like you guys did when you sat down with a financial advisor and started really thinking, is this going to work for us or isn't it? Most people get to that age, and we talk to a lot of them, and I know, they say, I'm 3 years from retirement. I just realized I can't retire. Right. I've been contributing for 40 years into this 401k and it hasn't kept up. I'm not going to be able to live my same lifestyle. And they have to make some of those decisions. I think that's an important lesson for a lot of listeners. There's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are sitting on the sidelines thinking, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't, but I'm taking the more conservative approach. Well, your conservative approach is probably going to be one of the riskiest things you do at the end of the day, unless you really want to step back at retirement. Right.
Yeah. With the future is so unknown. You have no idea what's going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Who knows where you're going to end up. So that seems, if you can generate some revenue that, moves with inflation, you're going to be a lot better off. I mean, there's just no question about that.
Yeah. And that's why real estate's always been a preferred asset class for people to hedge against inflation, especially wealthy people. They've known it for a long time, right? There's a difference that, they know that those tangible assets are going to keep them ahead of inflation, especially tangible assets that you can leverage, right? It just is what it is. Right. And that you can, because if you put 20% down on a property and it appreciates by 5%, let's say you put 20% down on $500,000, you put $100,000 in, it appreciates by 5%. You just got a 25% return. Well, we don't have 25% inflation, but you could argue our inflation's higher than 5% or higher than that 8% that you're, maybe you're getting on your 401k, which is really probably not a full 8%, and it's not leveraged, right? Because we can put, and you're not over leveraging. 20% is a pretty good chunk down on most real estate, but that entire asset appreciated, right? It's a hard asset that appreciates with it. And even if it just kept up with inflation, that 5% that it's going up, that's really a 25% return. And people don't realize that. They don't think about it. I think they realize it if you break it down, but we don't think about it that often. And that's why real estate in general is always such a preferred asset class for a lot of wealthy investors to hedge against inflation. But for the average everyday American, we don't have access to a lot of the privileged deals, right? That a lot of the institutional money and everybody else has access to. Our best access to hedge against all that is real estate. And a lot of it's single family real estate. And then we lead to short-term rental real estate. So, when you read Robert Kiyosaki's book, he talks about real estate. He doesn't talk about specifically short-term rentals. What, you saw us online, you said, made sense from a financial perspective, but was there any other, was there something that drew you guys into short-term rentals versus, getting back into multifamily or looking at long-term rentals or anything like that?
I got a buddy who does a lot of long-term rentals, and he's very young and, got into game early, and he enjoys that aspect or that asset class. For me and my wife, it was, we've done some Airbnbs and we know what we pay for Airbnbs, and the same thing everyone else realizes, right? When you stay at one, you're just like, holy crap, if they're getting this every week, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out there's some money to be made if you got it, if you're doing it right. And, plus, having the ability to go stay at the place, it all just, when just hearing the initial, video that you put out, it all just makes everything crystal clear. It just,
mind
blowing.
Yeah. And it's fun. And I always say every asset has pros and cons, but one of the biggest pros for me is just that it's really the income potential can be large compared to long-term rentals. Personal use is huge when we talk to lifestyle upgrade, right? I've got some properties that we buy that are just breaking even. They're appreciating really nicely. So we're building wealth. Somebody else is paying for a really, really nice place that we get to use over the years. And 3, 5, 10 years from now, they're going to be a huge asset, even though they weren't cash flowing that good. I've made built a lot of wealth by buying break even properties. This asset class allows us to do that and still get those ancillary benefits of the tax write-offs, the personal use, all those different things of having really nice assets in quality areas.
Yeah. It's funny you mention that, because the property we did buy, I know we'll get there eventually, but
let's go there now. Like, how did we select it, and where did you guys let's talk about that first acquisition.
Okay. So we poked around a bunch of different areas. Originally I thought Scottsdale was going to be the spot, and then we thought, well, if we want to be able to use it more without having to take a plane, we're like, well, where can we go that we would enjoy? And we like the beach. So we did choose Galveston, which is about a 5-hour drive from Frisco here, in Texas. And so we went down there. We gave Susie a call, Susie Austin, and she's like, oh yeah, we got some stuff we can look at. So we prepped with her a little bit before we went down. And then one weekend we drove down on a Friday, and we spent the afternoon looking at properties. We spent all day Saturday looking at properties. We spent Sunday morning looking at properties. I think we went through 20 plus properties. And by Sunday mid morning, actually by Saturday night, there were like 2 or 3 that we really had our eye on. And then by Sunday morning, we looked at a couple more and like, you know what, let's just put an offer in on this one. And so we were actually able to negotiate with the buyers a little bit, and they budged for us some, and we ended up buying it. And then the appraisal came in, and it was well above what we paid. So we were extremely happy with at that point. We thought we got a smoking deal, but long story short, it's not as good a deal as it looked at originally. We learned a lot since then, but that's how we got. I mean, it was pretty fast and furious once we started looking, and then trying to get it ready was a whole nother ball game.
Right. Then the setup phase starts, right? And getting it going through that. So felt like, and I want to talk about that. Like, why wasn't it as good of a deal as we originally thought? Let's talk about, because those, my whole goal with these podcasts are to learn lessons, share our lessons, so that somebody listening does, hopefully can avoid some of those lessons or know what to look for going into it. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, I'm always curious when that ends up being the case.
Well, my first mistake was not involving Vodyssey in the evaluation process.
The underwriting.
I was using the spreadsheets, and I had like 3 or 4 different properties that we really liked and ran those numbers on all those. And the one really stood out, because it was a 4-bedroom versus a 3. Everything else we looked at was 3, and it was in relatively the same price range. And so it looked like it was going to do vastly better than the 3 bedrooms. And then once we got going and had some sticker shock being on the beach or near the beach, there's some insurance costs that I did not realize. And then the other piece of it that I'm realizing now is, it's more than just the property manager percentage that matters, right? Because that's just one fee. Then they have, they bill back, all the cleaning fees. Then you got yard, which I included yard and electricity and that type of stuff. But then there's the insurance riders that I wasn't really aware of, which I'm sure any of the team would have been able to tell me about. Yeah. So there's several monthly expenses that are going to require a lot more out of this property to cover itself.
Yeah. And it's, and I appreciate you sharing that and being honest about it, because a lot of people are like, I didn't make any mistakes, I was good. Right. And it's good to talk through it, especially when you have the resources, Chad. You're going to hear it from me, because I know you have the resources to tap into, and, but it's a really good lesson of why we say how important walking into it with your eyes wide open and understanding the numbers is really, really important. And when you buy in a beach area, right? Insurance is going to be way higher than you're expecting. Annual maintenance costs are going to be higher, because you're right on the salt, right? It's going to be, there's going to be deferred maintenance that you're not used to having to deal with in Frisco on a home. Every year, anything metal is rusting out when you're on the beach, right? And so you're there's a lot of different things that you have to look at. And that is why we want to look over your underwriting for you, right? When you send it into Jacob, and we want to do that for our Vodyssey family. But those of you that aren't in the Vodyssey family, these are really, really important lessons because they can be expensive, right? They're expensive lessons, right? You're like, man, I've got a home run, I'm going to kill it. And then all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, I've got bills here, I've got bills here, I've got bills here, and I didn't plan on it. It's way different when you know those and you're okay with them and you walk into it. But when you're not planning on it, it's a punch in the gut a little bit, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I ran the numbers originally with my original estimate, it looked like we were going to be cash flow positive right out of the gate. And now it looks like it's going to be 3-4 years before we're actually cash flow positive on this property. And maybe there's still things we need to do. Like I still need to go through the maximize with Mike. I did talk to Brian a little bit about photos because we got some good reviews. It's running really well, but it's priced pretty low. So it's not going to cover it at the price point it's at because we did start it low. Like I did follow that part of the plan.
Yeah, we're launching it and getting that momentum. Yeah, and that's what and I'll tell you this just on the podcast. I tell it to you off the podcast, but you've got access to the resources to figure out what we need to do to maximize it. So let's get on the coaching call. Let's get on and let's look at what we need to do to maximize it because you're probably leaving some money on the table if we didn't finish that setup phase, didn't get it all the way to the end where we're really marketing to stand out in a crowd. You're in the peak season right now, so you're getting some revenue coming in, which is great. But I would we want to be in that 12 to 18 month minimum range before where you're clipping along, and we want to be profitable at that mark, right? We want to start hitting that mark, and hopefully, and my guess is you probably didn't miss with the underwriting that bad, right? You probably missed on your on the income. You were probably pretty close. You probably missed on the expenses, right?
Correct.
They're higher. But we want to see what we can do to maximize that revenue. And so we'll definitely look at that. And this is great to have this conversation, even on like a live podcast, like where it's going to go out and other people, because these are real conversations. This is what really happens. And this is the first mistake that a lot of brand new investors, and this is your first property. You should, you're not going to know all this stuff, but you paid a lot of money to be a part of a mastermind. We want to make sure you take advantage of that as well, so that we can avoid some of this. So this is my public shaming of Chad right now to say, get it together. Let's get our shit together and let's get this one working, right? So that's
exactly.
Awesome. So we're right there in the, when so you launched this? You didn't launch this last year, right? Did you buy this last year? And when did you launch?
So we ended up purchasing. It was the end of September of last year.
Okay.
And that was literally 2 weeks before my accident. Yeah.
So this is where the grace comes in and saying, okay, I know why you didn't get a lot of that stuff done. Right. And so let's share with everybody else what you went through right during this setup phase, which is exhausting. And all of this really did have to take a back seat. Right. So
let's go through really that. Did. Yeah. So the short version is I got to a pretty horrific car accident. A young woman didn't make it through the accident. I ended up in the hospital for 6 days. Got hit by a drunk driver at 6:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and they pushed me into oncoming traffic where I hit another truck head on. Get pretty substantial damage to my body. Lost my spleen, some other internal injuries, but have bounced back pretty well from that over the last 8 months. And but it did cost us a couple months at least in that setup phase where I was not able to travel to the place, and my wife was at home taking care of me for the most part. So it cost us a lot of time. Yeah. Yeah.
And rightfully so. I mean, when I saw you the first of the year and you were telling me, you were just barely getting back out, and you looked great. Thank goodness you were in the shape you were in, and because I think it made a big difference, right? You're involved in a tragic, fatal accident, and for somebody, and really a senseless accident for somebody drunk driving, and I have I have zero tolerance for it. I think it's hugely irresponsible, and it's thank goodness that you came out on the other side of it. But, when that's going on, I get why we're not, so I'm not going to, get too on you for not getting that finished. But I don't want to say, okay, now we can get back to it when things are back in action. And it's been, I know that was a long and hard road to get back in shape. And like I said, you're as good a shape as you're in. That definitely added to the speedy recovery that you were able to get. But man, what a horrific thing to go through right in the middle of all of this, brand first time, right? And saying, okay, now let's figure all this out. But so you're feeling good? You're feeling like you're back in action? How's the recovery going? I know that happened did you say that happened in September?
Happened the beginning of October.
Okay. Beginning of October. We're June now. So you're 8 months in, you feeling good?
I am. I had to prove it to myself though, because last weekend went with a buddy to Grand Canyon, and we did the rim to rim, we
Nice.
did. I swear we did the hardest way too. It's a long trek, and my wife was giving me hell. She's like, "You sure you need to do this?" I'm like, you know what? I kind of do, just to prove that I am back, because I'd done it last year with my same buddies, and so I felt like that was a challenge that I needed to overcome, just to give myself that confidence that I am indeed back to my normal self.
Awesome. Well, congrats for getting through that. That's a tough one. I haven't done that. Scott on our team, Scott Marshall, our CMO, he's done that a number of times. He loves doing that stuff. But so he'll be excited to hear that you completed that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, good. And so this year, tell me what the plans are for getting back in the property and getting it back operate. Let's kind of want to talk just you and I, and everybody else can listen into it. Like, what is the plans to maximize now, right? What are we going to do this year?
So the funny thing is, so we've got several 5-star reviews now, and one of them made it pretty clear. The house is much nicer than its pictures, was one of the reviews. And it came, I think it was either right before or right after I talked to Brian. I scheduled the meeting with those guys, and he had gone through the listing, and he'd made some suggestions, which I'm working on. And then, I want to do the picture session with them for sure. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's no reason to go through with the picture expense until we got this thing ready to have really good photos and have everything ready to go. So my next step is to get with Mr. Whitfield and see what he suggests, and so we can get the property ready to go, get some really nice pictures, get the listing up to speed so that we can get it, toward the top of that market instead of sitting in the middle with everybody else.
Love it. And that's going to make the difference between getting it, profitable, in the first 12 months to 18 months versus the first 3 years, because now you're just riding that wave in the middle of the market, hoping that revenue catches up with where we're at. Right. Yeah. And we don't want to do that. That's what, you don't need to do that. And that is exactly the steps. So as you're listening, we've got 3 steps that we really work hard on here at Vodyssey that I believe every property needs to maximize. The first step is that acquisition, really knowing and dialing in your numbers. We talked a little bit about that, missing on expenses a little bit, and understanding the numbers when we walk in. The next 2 phases, really right after you acquired this property, went through the horrific accident, and the other 2 phases have taken a back seat up until now. And I'm glad to hear that it's on the agenda, because that next phase is the setup, creating that unique experience, bringing in the custom artwork, bringing in the area, the outside area into the property, and really just bringing this property to life. Like I always say, we're breathing personality into the property. And then that phase of marketing and getting those right marketing assets, doing the right photo shoot so that it's presenting itself well, so it stands out in the crowd, so we can show and articulate everything we have in this property. Because the comment you had is saying, man, this property is way nicer than the photos. We don't want to hear that, right? And that's almost just as bad as hearing, man, these photos were so photoshopped, I walked in and it wasn't as good, right? We don't want to hear either one of those. These property needs to be set up so great and photographed so accurately that the guest walks in and they're just wowed all the way around, like, holy crap, this is exactly what I thought I was walking into, and this is awesome. And it's just, and that's the next phase for you guys. And Nice property, nice area. I have every confidence, with Susie and you guys picking out. Most people pick out the right property. We missed a little on the expense side of it, but the potential of the property is going to be there. But we have to do those next steps, right? We have to dial that in, get that custom artwork, get the accessories to really breathe that personality into it, and then articulate it. And those are the phases that are so important to us. And we've dialed in phase 1. We've learned a little bit on phase 1, it sounds like. And now we've got to dial in phase 2 and 3, which is going to make the difference of profitability, right? There's a big difference in the middle of the market and the top of the market. And I'm very familiar with your market. And, in those properties, there's going to be probably a $30,000 or $40,000 swing annually on those types of properties. And that probably puts you in the black instead of the red.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. So awesome. And so that's on the agenda. And so let's talk about this timing, because this is a question a lot of people get is, okay, are you going to, because right now you're rolling right into the peak season, and it sometimes isn't the smartest move to pull it off during the peak season to do all this stuff, because this takes time, right? And so are you planning on after the peak season, when things slow down this fall, or when is the kind of, what are you planning on doing that?
Yeah, that's kind of the plan. I mean, June and July are completely booked. August is a little light right now, but I'm sure it'll fill in too. But yeah, sometime early to mid fall. I'm gonna get with Mike first to see what he's suggesting, and if it's not too dramatic, which I don't anticipate it being too dramatic, but definitely some artwork and things like that I know will be on the agenda, and that's stuff that might be able to do pretty easily and quickly and not have to worry about changing, messing with blocking out any time or anything like that.
Exactly.
But we'll see what that brings. If then I won't hesitate to do that sooner rather than later, as soon as there's an opening. But if it's more than that, then we'll definitely wait till down season a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good. And that's a smart way to do it. That's what we always suggest. And a lot of times when the case goods are in, meaning the beds, the dressers, the tables, all the big stuff, and you're just going to bring in accessory items and custom artwork and bringing that to life, a lot of times that doesn't have to be a big block on the calendar, right? You can do that in between stays, but it's just scheduling it out, figuring it all out, measuring it all out. And that does take time anyway. So it's going to take a couple months to put that together. And so, but all that's going to help in the shoulder season too. Like those are things that really help you stand out in those slow periods during the winter when not everybody's going to the beach. Right. And then obviously rolling into next peak season is going to be huge. And that's where you're going to get your biggest gains on revenue.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome, Chad. Listen, man, this has been a good conversation. We always like to, I like to just kind of go through, there's always nuggets of information and lessons and everything else. And I think we picked up a few along this way, right? Especially for those people who aren't in the game, understanding that sometimes it's really easy to overlook some things that you would think, well, that's obvious. You got to check how much your insurance is, or that's obvious. You didn't know you had to have that. These things aren't that obvious when it's your first time doing it, right? You don't know what you don't know. And it could be, you could easily overlook $10,000 or $15,000 of expenses a year. And that's a big deal. That's the difference between making money and losing money. And so 100%. Really dialing that in is a huge lesson, and then completing the process, right? And there was a very good reason why that process didn't get completed, and we're grateful and thankful that it turned out the way it did for you, and you're on the back end of it and completed kind of the big challenge for you. The rim to rim at the Grand Canyon is pretty Herculean feat, if you will, especially as it warms up. And you just got done, like you said, you were a week or two late, which makes a big difference on temperatures down there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, listen, at the end of every episode, I always like to ask, like, if you, like, I'm picking out like nuggets and lessons learned along the way, but if you could go back and tell yourself, hey, listen, before you dive into the next one, these are some of the lessons I learned. This is what I wish I would have done differently. What would that be? Anything different than what we talked about?
We really talked about it, but, having access to the information and using it are different things, right? So I guess I wish I would have done what was right in front of me instead of thinking I knew more than I did, just from listening to podcasts.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, and no, I don't think anybody said that. We've had a version of a lot of different things, on as lessons learned, but I don't think anybody's ever said, hey, having access to information, knowing it's right there, and actually then executing on it those are two different things. And saying, hey, listen, if you've got the resources, use them. And I think that's a really good lesson. And thinking, okay, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, right? When you know and you feel confident and you believe in a process and you believe that you've got the right solution in front of you, you got to execute on it and you got to put it in place. So I appreciate that, and I think that's a really good lesson all the way across the board. And so we'll kind of drop the mic on that one, right? We'll wrap it up. And Chad, I really appreciate your time. This has been, it was fun to catch up a couple months ago. I always love catching back up with you guys that are willing to come on and share your stories on the podcast. I know how helpful they are. So many people listen to them because we get comments and questions all the time that these are their favorite episodes that we ever do. And so I appreciate you being able to share the lessons, the ups and downs, and everything in between. And really looking forward to seeing this property maximize now and starting to move forward and making you guys some money. And then we add number 2, right? Then we go find that second one.
Yes, sir. That's it's funny because I think that's the exciting part. It's like, okay, we got this one finished, so we can get on to the next one and figure out where we want to go. So that having that carrot out there is exciting too.
Awesome. Yep. It keeps the game fun. We're in the game. We're constantly in the game, and we keep building on it. So Chad, we're going to wrap it up. Those of you that are listening, we always appreciate your time. We know how valuable it is, and we really, really appreciate you spending it with us. At the end of every episode, I always ask you a couple of things. We don't run ads. We don't run sponsorships. We don't do anything on this podcast because we don't want people telling us what we have to talk about, what we have to endorse, right? We like to talk about the things we want to talk about. The only way that happens and the only way this show grows is for you guys to share it, like it, review it. If you have more than 30 seconds, if you know somebody else that would like to be a part of these conversations, those shares do help us grow the show and get the message out and help other people walk into this game with their eyes wide open. And the final and the most important thing that I always ask you at the end of every episode is to go pick that one thing you can do today to start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website? Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodyssey.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.